Going over Chroma digitizing today. We're not talking about the machine at all. And what I would suggest is to just follow along my screen instead of try to duplicate what I'm doing. Today, I'm just going through the basics. So this is a beginner class. We're going to talk about a couple different topics like our stitch types, manual digitizing, auto digitizing. We'll go through changing colors, saving files, printing the run sheet, and any other questions that you guys have. So you will chat in your questions in the chat box. I've already been writing a couple things there. So it looks like a little conversation bubble on your screen. And I will monitor that and answer the questions as we go along, okay? So again, this is a very beginner class, just going over the basics, and just follow along, take some notes, and it will be recorded, so you can always request a copy after the class, okay? So the first thing I want to go through, I want to sort of go through almost like a full process of how we're digitizing. And it's important to know what digitizing is and how we're creating a file that is going to speak to the machine. So with digitizing, we're creating stitch types and we're creating the sequence that the machine is going to read. So if we don't have proper digitizing, the machine's not going to stitch it out well at all. Doesn't matter what type of machine it is. So we do want to make sure that we're digitizing properly. And of course, it's going to take quite a while to really learn a lot and become more advanced. So the software or any software, if you're brand new to it, don't get discouraged right away. It will take multiple classes and a buildup of classes to really learn and keep piling onto your knowledge base of the software, okay? So I just want to go through our first thought is, are we either just creating a file from scratch, or are we using an image that we already have? So really there's going to be two different ways that we begin our digitizing. We're either auto digitizing or we're just manually digitizing. Okay, so a lot of times we're going to have a JPEG or some type of image that we want to convert into a digitized file. So we do have our auto digitizer option. It's located just underneath the file key at the very top left of your screen. And this is available in all tiers of Chroma. So I'm using Chroma Inspire. It's the basic package, and everything that I'm going through today will apply to any tier that you get. So we can auto digitize, and with the auto digitizer, you're finding an image or using your logo. So for example, we can just use maybe this for example. This is a client logo, and we're just clicking through. We can change the size. And then when we finish it off, so let's say, I'll keep it that size. When we finish it off, it has, stitches created for us. The important thing to know about the auto digitizer is it's not just a one click and done feature. You may still have to make some changes or edit to ensure the stitch type is nice and clean and you have the right stitch type for the right area. So just keep in mind, it's going to help you get probably halfway there, and then we might need to make some edits. So you can see this actually created a different stitch type than the other areas. So we have our auto digitizer that we can use, or we have a manual digitizing method where we're going to bring in that image and then we'll trace over it using our different stitch types. So first we can do auto digitizing, and maybe this works really well for us and we want to just keep that, or we want to create it on our own. So when we're manually digitizing, we're either just using, say, our text tool, just starting from scratch, or maybe we're just going to draw some shapes on the screen, or we have a JPEG or PNG that we want to bring in and trace on top. So we went through the auto digitizing tool, that's the number one. And manual, we're going to use the backdrop tool. So the backdrop tool is located just underneath that ruler on the left-hand side of your screen. And with the backdrop tool, when we select a backdrop, it's going to place our image onto the screen. So this is just the JPEG, or it's a PNG. And then now I can choose a stitch type and I can start tracing around this image. So I can go in and I just selected any of my stitch types, and now I can begin digitizing. And when I say digitizing, we're just creating the shape that we want using a stitch type. So I happened to choose the satin stitch. We could use the complex fill stitch. So just sort of giving an example of using a different type. And you're just tracing over the image. So we can even use our run stitch, and we could create this using a run stitch. And I'm just clicking, drawing, following the lines. So you're tracing, or you can say, I guess, you're drawing on the screen, creating stitch types. Okay. So we can digitize using the auto digitizer, and of course we may have to make some edits, or we can digitize using the manual option, which I would recommend to use the backdrop if you have a JPEG or a PNG, or you can actually just start from scratch and you could just begin making something on the screen. So maybe we just want to make some text and just write out some text and then change the color or so on and go from there. Okay. So we have different ways of digitizing. Now let's take a little dive into our different stitch types. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hi, please keep your microphone muted as this is recorded. If you have a question, you can chat it in the chat box. Okay. I just sent another message there. So when we're manually digitizing, we want to think about what stitch type makes most sense for our different areas. So giving you guys the example over here, I actually used 3 different stitch types here. We have our run stitch, this one up top. And this is just a simple single line of stitches. So the needle's just poking into the fabric and going in a single line. So the run stitch is going to be very thin, and that can be used for just open shapes or any small detail. The satin stitch, which might make most sense for these letters here, is a side-to-side stitch. And so we can see these threads here that are mimicked on screen are going up and down. They're laying side by side, and they have a nice smooth look. So your satin stitch is going to be mostly for your letters or any smaller object, and you could use the satin stitch for that. The last stitch that I have here is our complex fill. So you can tell the difference here. The complex fill is going to be for larger areas that you want filled in, and it's more of a side-to-side stitch. It's going to kind of travel across the material and fill it in with your threads. So a lot more needle pokes in your fabric here, and it's going to fully cover. So anything that you need to fill in with a larger area, I would use the complex fill. Okay. So you have the run stitch, satin, and complex fill, and those are your three main stitch types. Even if you have Chroma Plus or if you have Chroma Luxe, you might see other options on your side menu, but these are the three main that you're going to really recognize in any type of embroidery. So those are the three that you'll really want to become familiar with and use in your digitizing. We have a class focused on shaping and editing stitch types. So that's a great class to take after this one. We usually do that one quite often, and that will go through really in-depth creating shapes, curves, and things of that nature. So I had a question that someone asked about, what would you do if someone sent you a vector file? So a vector file is going to be a great file to use with the auto digitizer. So I would definitely just click on the auto digitizer, choose your vector file, and usually it'll auto digitize very, very well, just due to the nature of that file type. And you still might have to make a couple edits or just based on your preferences, but a vector file like an SVG or AI, those are going to be great with the auto tool. And of course, you can always still manually digitize. But as you can see, this blue logo here, it did work very well with my auto tool, and I'll have less work using that. I might just edit this stitch type here, so it'll all look very uniform. I had another question that asks, would you use a run stitch for an applique? So yes, a run stitch is going to be one of the components of an applique, because that stitch will go down in your fabric and show you where to place your applique material. So actually just last Thursday we had a class focused on specifically applique and 3D puff, and you can certainly request a copy of that video by sending an email to service@ricoma.com. And if my screen is freezing at any time, I'll make sure to go a little bit slower. But it is based on everyone's connection, so I will try my best to go a little bit slower, and that way, if it does lag at any point, we can catch up. So I'm going to continue on. We talked about our different ways of beginning our design. So we have our auto tool, we have manual options. We can also decide upon our three different stitch types. So of course we have the run stitch, the satin stitch, and the complex fill. And those are shown here on my screen. So just giving you guys an example of those. So once we have our design, and let's say we wanted to, I'm going to grab this and open up a new window. So once we have our design here, and maybe we'll want to make some edits like the size or changing the colors. So first, let's go into how to change colors. At the bottom of my screen, you see I have lots of different colors here, ranging from 1 to 17. And I have orange, green, pink, purple, yellow, and so on. We can add additional colors on my color chip bar, or we can also change those colors. So if you have just downloaded Chroma, you'll notice that your default colors are probably a blue, green, and pink on number 1, 2, and 3. But you can change those by just double clicking on that color chip. So I just clicked on number 1, and I have a whole menu of colors here that I can click, and now I can change the color. So we can change any of these color chips. You're just gonna double click on it. You can switch it up. And now I have the color chips changed, but how do I change the color of my actual design on the screen? Anytime you're changing a color, you're just selecting the area of the file that you want to change. So let's say I want to change this outside C to red. I have it selected, and I'm going to left click on my red color chip. There's another way to do the same thing. Let's say I want to change the inner C. We can actually go to the upper right-hand corner where I have a couple of settings tabs. So up at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll have a couple tabs there. And the second to last tab looks like a little word bubble. It says commands. So your commands include colors and some end commands like trimming, and also different tie-in and tie-offs. Those are just referring to knots. In the color tab, I could enter in the number of the color chip that I want to change this to. So let's say I want to make this purple. My purple is number 4. So I'm looking down here in the lower left-hand corner where I have 1 through 17. So I can change it to 4 and press apply, and it changed the color to number 4 here. So we can easily change colors in different ways just by either clicking directly on the chip, so doing a left click, or by selecting the object and using the command tab. So we can change colors to whatever we would like, and then we can save it down just like that. The other thing that we might want to change is the size. So when you're sizing in the program, the first thing that you want to take a look at is you have this grid on your screen, and on the top and left of the screen, you'll notice what looks like a ruler. If I right click on that ruler, we can see that at the very top, I have metric or inches. So I might want to visualize this in inches. And now I can see it's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches wide. The machine is always going to be in metric, but we can easily switch back and forth. So let's say I want to change the size just visually on the screen. I want to select the whole design, so we can just drag a box around it, and I can drag the corner of the design to resize it like that. So that's one way to resize. We can just drag the corner in and out. Or if we know that this needs to be a very specific size, then I can go in my upper right-hand corner of all of those settings tabs. And the very last one says transform. So in the transform box here, I could enter in the size, like the width or the height. So we could say if this needs to be 5 inches wide, I can type that in and click apply, and now it's perfectly 5 inches wide. Or vice versa. If you know that maybe it's going on to a hat and you really want to keep it the height under 2.5 inches, so you can enter in the height there and it will adjust accordingly. So I had a couple questions, so I'm going to start with the questions referring to color. So when I changed my color chips down here at the bottom, let's say I want to keep those color chips for every time I open the program. And also, let's say I want to change this to my thread brand. So at the very bottom right of your screen, you have a couple options, and if you hover over these, they have a little message that will tell you what they're going to do for you. So if we change the palette, it's the little option that looks like a square. We can change this thread palette to our thread brand. So let's say we wanted to do Madeira thread brand, and now I can click OK, and all of these colors are now a Madeira thread brand color. So I can change our palette easily. You're clicking on that square option, and you have this drop-down list of most of the common thread brands here. Okay, so I can change it to Madeira. And then if I want to set that and keep that as my default, then the very last key that has 3 little dots right on top of each other, I'm going to click that and choose Make Current Default. So these colors, these Madeira colors, will show up every time I open up Chroma. So I can easily change the color to any Madeira, and that way it'll match your actual thread color that you have. Okay. So I think I answered those questions based on color. I had another question on something in our editing, which would be the density. And so density is very important to know about. And what density is referring to is how close our stitches are to each other. So let me go off to the side here, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So we'll start with a satin, and then we can also start with or move on to a complex fill. So the density is how close each stitch is to each other. So our first blue column here, if we look back over to our upper right-hand corner of settings, you'll notice that it's just the second tab here where it says fill, and we have density here at the bottom. So our default is 0.5, and that's a little bit high. We can see that there's a little bit of space in between those stitches there. So as I lower it, we can see that they become a lot closer together. So on this other one, let's say if I raise it, which normally you wouldn't do, you can see that they're much farther apart. So a lower density, a 0.3 or 0.4, is going to have those stitches much closer together. And of course, a higher number, they will be farther apart. Your density is something that will depend on the size as well as the material that you're stitching on. A good starting point is going to be 0.3. That's a good place to be. They're not too close together, but there's also not a lot of space in between, so your threads will really fill in any gap. On the complex fill, it's the same thing. So let's say I lower this down. We're very dense now. Those stitches are very close together. And if I then raise it, we see a lot of space. So I wouldn't really recommend to go too low on your density, especially with a complex fill. 0.3 or 0.4, which is the default, is usually pretty good. But again, it does depend on the size of the object, so the size of the area here, and also the material that you're working with. You don't want to have a very dense stitch out on a lightweight, stretchy fabric. It will end up puckering and you'll have something very stiff and dense. So that's something that needs to be considered. So the default density that Chroma does have is an okay starting point. I do like to change the satin density because the default there is 0.5, and usually I will go lower than that. The default for a complex fill is a good starting point. So another thing that I want to discuss, which this is a very common question, especially focused on basics, which is what we're doing now, just talking about basic features and important aspects of digitizing, is trimming. So you can see here on my screen that these 4 objects, they are all the same color. So the program is actually creating a jump stitch. We can see that here at the bottom in between object 2 and 3. And we can see it here at the top of object 3 and 4. Now, sometimes a jump stitch will make sense because we don't want the machine to have to make a bunch of trims and knots in the back. But when the objects are this far apart, it doesn't make sense to have that big thread jumping across because we will see it and we'll have to end up trimming it ourselves. So we can add in a trim. We're going to select the object that stitches first, and we'll go into that command tab. So earlier when I was showing you, we have our color command. We also have a trimming command. So our start command and our end command is what the machine is going to read for this specific object. So the end command, I want it to trim. And when I click trim and choose apply, we'll see that that jump stitch now disappeared because we're telling the machine when it finishes to trim. We can do the same thing on this object. So we can go here and we can click trim and we can apply. And you can actually select all objects at once and do that just one time, and that would help save some time. Okay. So I believe I answered a lot of those questions that we had. So again, just to review, we just discussed colors here, how to change our colors, how we can set our default palette. So we can change our palette and we can save that. And we did go through density as well. So that will be something that you will have to edit or just check and see if the density is right for what you're doing. And then we just discussed how to add in a trim as well. So the other topics that we're going to go through, we will talk about saving, printing a run sheet. And I noticed that I had, I think, 2 questions about curving a satin stitch. And we have a class that is focused on the details and very much in-depth shaping and editing. But to give you guys a quick demo of how we're creating a curve with any of our stitches is you're going to be clicking. So with a satin stitch, you're clicking left to right and moving, making a little train track type of shape. And if I want it to curve, I'm going to hold down on the Control key on my keyboard. So now I'm holding down on Control, and you can see that my lines are curved now as I move around the space. So with your satin stitch, you're going to use that Control key, and the same thing goes for a complex fill. If I want to create a curved shape, I'm just holding down on my Control key. I would recommend to check out the Shaping and Editing Stitch Types webinar that is posted on the YouTube channel, and that will give you guys a lot more detailed demo of how to create these curves, how to edit them. But for today, it is just a very basic class on some of our basic tools here. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful on those 2 questions. I want to go through the run sheet, and we're also going to talk about file types. So this file here that I'm working on, the Chroma working file type, is called an RDE. Okay, so the RDE file is the file that you always want to save as. So when we're saving any file, we're just going to File, Save As, and you'll choose RDE, or usually it's set to that default, or you can type in .rde in at the end of your file name. Okay, so the RDE is the working file type. You always need a copy of this. Now for the machine, you guys will probably know that you need a DST. So after we save our RDE file, we will then go to File, Save As, and we'll save the DST file. So you are always going to have both. The reason why we always want to keep, and I should say, we should save an original copy of the RDE, is because when we need to make an edit to a file, we want to make sure we open the RDE file. This is the one that we're going to open and edit from. And so I'll give you guys an example. So let's say I'm going to open up a file. And so, okay, I have this. Let me find a good example. We have this file here, and this is a DST. You can see that in the name, so it's called buoy.dst. Now let's say I want to edit the color of these waves because the color doesn't really seem to make sense. I'm trying to edit the wave here. You can see how this wave is segmented into many different small objects. So it's very difficult for me to select this entire green wave and to change the color. I'm only able to select a small section, and I need to go back and try to select more sections. This is a DST, so this is just ready for the machine. If I go to open the RDE file, I actually see that it looks like this is in the correct colors. And if I wanted to change the color of the waves, I'm actually able to select them all as one and better edit my sections of stitch. Even with the letters, I can easily change the size. Whereas if I'm working with the DST, then it still is selecting small segments of those letters, the underlay and the top stitch. So we always want to edit from your RDE file, and the DST is just for the machine. Okay? So when we save the RDE, you're always keeping the original copy. And the RDE file is the file that actually saves the original or correct color information. A DST file doesn't hold any color information. So that's why when I opened up that buoy file, the DST version, it just used my colors that I have down here on my color chip menu. It didn't actually use the correct red, blue, and black. So the DST doesn't hold color information, and just keep that in mind because when you're loading your DST, you're going to enter in the colors to the machine. So no matter what program you're using or what machine you're using, a DST file just does not hold color info. That's just not, it doesn't remember it or read it, and that's normal. So that's why we're always going to print the run sheet from the RDE file. So once we have our file finished, we'll go to File, Print Preview, and you'll see your run sheet pop up. So the run sheet gives you your small display here, gives you a little image of or a preview of your image, or your file, I mean. And the next page, if I click next, I can see each section. So I want to make sure that I save this down or print this off so that once I load my DST to the machine, I can enter in the correct colors, the red, dark black, and so on. Okay. So printing the run sheet from the RDE. If we were to open the DST file and we wanted to print a run sheet, we certainly can, because we can see which section is in what order. So I can see that, you know, where it tells me yellow, I actually need that to be a different color, and we can assign the colors that way, but it's much, much easier to do that from your RDE file, okay? If you have a DST and you wanted to save it into an RDE, it is not going to make it easier for you at all. That's why I said you must have the original RDE. So if I saved this file down as a DST and I don't have an original RDE, I can't just save it back to an RDE and expect it to be easy to work with or to keep the color information. So very important that you're always keeping the original working file type. Okay, so the RDE is the Chroma specific file type. So you'll notice that, say for example, with a Photoshop file, only Photoshop can save in PSD. That's a working file type. With a Wilcom product, you would be saving in an EMB. So an RDE is specific to Chroma. DST, of course, you can save with many different programs, and that's a machine format. So to give a better example, I guess, working file format is an RDE. So the RDE is going to be the working format, and a DST is your machine format. So this is your final format for the machine. Okay. So any other questions on the files or saving or our run sheet? And you'll notice that Chroma can actually save into many different formats. If you have a small brother machine, Chroma can actually save as a PES file. So Chroma can really work across many different machine models. It's not specific to Chroma. Just the RDE format is. That's the working file type. And so usually with your sort of proprietary file formats, such as a Wilcom working file type, Chroma probably will not be able to read that because same thing if we think vice versa. Wilcom is probably not going to open an RDE file because it is specific to this software. So we went over manual digitizing, auto digitizing. We went over our basic stitch types, saving, colors, run sheets. One other topic or tool that I want to discuss with you guys is our artwork tool, because the artwork tool is going to be very useful to us when we are manually digitizing. So we can see that this tool here is on the left side of your panel or your screen. And when I click on that small arrow, we have this drop-down menu that shows rectangle, ellipse, triangle, diamond, so on. So let's say we want to create a perfect circle. I clicked on the ellipse tool, and I can either make some ovals, or if I want to make a perfect circle, I'm going to hold onto the Control key on my keyboard, and that will keep the height and width the same. So we'll have a perfect circle show up on our screen. Now, these objects here, these 3 ellipses that I have, these are not stitch types yet. This is just a simple, if we zoom in, you're going to see it's just a single line. It's only an artwork. So what we need to do is we need to use our auto digitizer. So I have this circle selected, and I can tap onto the auto digitizer tool. And it does ask me. And now this is a run stitch. So you can see the red circle. This is actually a stitch type. Now I have a perfect circle of a run stitch. So let's say we actually wanted it to be a complex fill. Well, if you select your artwork, you're going to notice in the upper right-hand corner, you have the type. And you can choose fill, apply, and now it's filled in. So now when I select my auto digitizer, it's going to make a complex fill. Okay. So this is great to use for quick shapes. We have a star, rounded will be more of a rounded corner type of rectangle. You can make a hexagon, leaf, heart, flower, quite a few different shapes here. And probably the most important would be, our ellipse. So we can really get a perfect circle. Okay. And in our webinar that we have on shaping and editing stitch types, we do go through very much in depth using that artwork tool. So okay. And so we did have a question on, can you use a shape tool or the artwork tool to create, say, a satin border to put onto a patch? So this is how we will make a nice satin border. So we're going to use our ellipse, and I want 2 of them. So I can just copy it. So right-click copy, just like you would any other sort of item. And we have these 2 circles. I want to change the color, so let's make them contrasting colors. And I'm going to shrink one so that we can lay them on top of each other and we can have a ring of color showing. So we have a ring of the dark blue, right? Let's make sure that they're perfectly aligned before we continue on. So I'm going to select, I'm going to shrink them down a bit too because it's quite large. I have both selected, and we have alignment tools at the very top of our screen. If you hover over them, you see we have horizontal center align and vertical center align. So we just want to make sure that these are perfectly nestled on top. Now that I have them still both selected, if I click on the auto digitizer, then it's going to auto digitize only what it sees. So since that darker blue was covered in the middle, it only made the darker blue in a ring. And now we have a nice satin ring. And of course we can lower that density, and this could be a nice border for a patch. Okay, and of course you can, if you want it to be thicker, you're changing the size of that center circle, and then we can get a thicker satin ring. So there are little tricks that you can do, and of course you can kind of do that with different shapes as well. If you wanted a rectangle of satin stitches, you can do the same type of trick where you're layering them on top of each other selecting both and then clicking the auto digitizer while both are selected. Okay, so that's important. If I select, you know, the dark blue here and just auto digitize, it will auto digitize the whole dark blue. But if I have them both selected, we get a ring. Okay. Okay, so I think I answered all of the questions. If your question wasn't answered and maybe I missed it, you can definitely chat that again. We are nearing the end. Of course, I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So definitely take a moment to chat anything else that you have there. You know, this little note here that I have on the screen is very important. So you can kind of write that down as a note, and I'll copy any other notes that we have here. So, you know, we have our manual and auto digitizing options. We have our 3 different stitch types. Again, these are our 3 main stitch types. One thing that I want to discuss that is actually very important, and this is something I see quite often as a mistake or an error or issue, I guess we can say, with our satin stitch type. Our machine is not going to create a satin stitch that extends. This is 2 inches. We can't have a thread be that long, just hanging with no like anchor point. So if you see a satin stitch on your screen that looks like this looks, it's not filled in. Even if I lower the density, it's still not filled in. That is because it's much too wide. So a satin stitch is going to be, even now, still too wide. The sweet spot is 0.8 inches wide. So now it's filled in and that looks normal. That's going to actually stitch out. If we have any areas that look like this, it's not going to work on the machine. The machine will not be able to read that, and it's going to end up sort of staying in one position, and it can't sort of move forward. So just make sure with any satin stitch, you're keeping it. So even then, it's a little bit too wide. And when we shrink it, it looks like that. So it should look like this on your screen. Anytime you have that sort of weird look, it's too wide, okay? So that's very important on a satin. That's why with satin stitches, we're usually using those for letters or smaller areas. Complex fill, if we need an object to be very wide, then we're going to use a complex fill. And that will allow us to have something filled in. Now I have seen another, I guess it could be an issue where I have this complex fill shape here, but if I change the pattern to look like a satin pattern, it still doesn't show up. It's still much too wide. And if I keep shrinking this down, these look very similar, but the way that they function is very different. So the complex fill, which is the one on the right, it has a satin pattern, but the way we edit it is very different than this one. We actually have different angle lines. It functions differently. So just keep in mind if you have something that's looking a little different, that might be it. But of course, I don't want to get into too many details on that section of digitizing because it's a little bit more advanced. Let's look at this red part. If I change it to a satin pattern, I'm going to have a gap because I can only have one angle line in this shape because it's an original complex fill shape. And a complex fill will only allow you to have one angle line, and the yellow angle line is what's determining the stitch direction. So even if I filled it in with a satin pattern, I still have a gap there. Okay. So let's see, we have a couple questions, and one of them was, other than density, is there anything to keep in mind for different fabric types? Yes, underlay is something that you will want to, I would recommend, you can do some research on underlay. I believe we do have a video on the YouTube channel that does talk about different underlays. And it's definitely something I can discuss in a future webinar, but underlay will be different depending on different fabrics. Such as, let's say you have something that's a very fluffy fabric, you want to make sure you have an extra underlay. So something that's going to kind of smush down that fabric and provide a nice base for your top stitches. If you guys want a copy of today's recording, you must email service@chroma.com and you must put in the subject line January 4th webinar. That way we can be sure to send you the correct webinar from today. Okay, so send an email and we'll send that to you once it is finished downloading. Another question I had was, is there a way to auto center the design? So the design, whatever you have, your design, so here I have a couple different areas. If I look at the center point, which is this red and green shape, the program is always going to put your center point right in the center of the design, no matter what it is. So here's my center point, and if I look at my file, print preview, run sheet, I can see that big X, the big star in the middle, that's my center point. So that's something you don't need to worry about. Now let's say we want to actually change the center point and we want to put this logo on the side of a hat. So I want the center point to be somewhere elsewhere. I don't want it to be in the middle. Then at that stoplight icon at the top of your screen, you have a small arrow and you can choose one location for your center point. So if I choose one location, and let's say I put it over here, then now when I go to File, Print Preview, this big black X, the little starburst, that's my center point. So my machine is going to center that little black X in the middle of my hoop. So usually it's going to just be set to the center. So whatever you have on screen, it'll find that center point. But if you do want to change it, you can just tap on that little arrow and choose one location, and you can click anywhere on the screen. I could put it down here, so we can change easily. Okay. Okay, so I believe I answered all of the questions. We went through center points. We went through quite a few of our basic topics. If you guys have additional questions, you can always send an email to service@racoma.com, and please just provide as much information as you can. If you're working with a JPEG, send us the JPEG. If you're working on a file, send us the RDE file, and that way we can see the file. We can send you a screen recording of how to do something. We can check it out. We can make sure you're doing it properly. We send you screenshots of where to do certain things. So it's always going to be much easier if you send us either an image, a screenshot, or the actual file that you're working with. That way we can better assist you. So any questions you guys have, again, email service@racoma.com. For a copy of the recording, please email service as well, and just put in the subject line January 4th webinar, okay? Thank you guys so much. Hope you guys had a great new year, and you guys asked some really great questions. I appreciate the, you guys being involved, and we'll see you next time. We have webinars about every week, twice a week, okay? Thank you guys so much.